Namaste to all of you. I hope that things are all well with you. And today we start the third of the 6 classes on Vyaktitva Ka Vikas, or the blooming of the humanness. So let us start with the prayer and then we'll play the mantra one more time. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Bhyo Namaha Harihi Om Atrinatva Krime Hanmi Kanvena Jamadagnina Vishwavasor Brahmana Hataha Kriminagum Raja Apyeshagsthapatir Hataha Atho Mata Atho Pita Atho Sthura Atho Kshudra Atho Krishna Atho Shveta Atho Ashatika Hata Shvetabhis Saha Sarve Hata Aharavadya Shrutasya Havisho Yatha Tat Satyam Yadamam Yamasya Jambhayoh Adadhami Tathahi Tat Khandphanmrasi. Harihi Om.
So let's start the class. In yesterday's class, we saw in the second chapter the process of manifestation of living beings, and in particular the human living being. And the process was that you have a constant inner light in the form of, not in the really the form of, but in the nature of consciousness, awareness, knowledge. And this is manifest in some stages. There's a process of doing that. And the first stage we saw was it transforms into an I thought, I am. And then it transforms into a mind with many thoughts. Many thoughts means as you wake up in the morning, you first look at, oh, I am. And then you remember, I am lying next to someone, or I am the father or mother of some children, or that I have to go to the office. Not these days, of course, but normally. And so on. So that is the mind. Then you open your eyes. So this consciousness, the next step is that it enlivens the instruments, both the instruments of perception and the instruments of action. Then it also transforms itself into the body. And so then you can see now it becomes more and more external. And from the body, or before the body, there was one step that I neglected. In terms of the instruments, the next thing that happens is that the outside world, the so-called outside world, there is really no outside as it is at the end of our study, but so-called outside world, various forms, sounds, smells, and so on, they enter the instrument and become now, you have a a form consciousness, a smell consciousness. So this is the transformation that it goes through, and then to the body, and then you are now transacting with the outside world. Now, this is something like examining how a wave of the ocean comes about from the water of the ocean. And so it first becomes a wavelet, and then it becomes much bigger. It becomes a huge wave, and then it perhaps might take form of some droplets, some foam, and so on. So there is a certain transformation of the water that takes place, all the time remaining the water. So it's no separation per se, but the point is that the water is without form, always constant, the same, but then occasionally it transforms itself into some kind of a form which has 3 or 4 stages to it. So this is what we studied in the second chapter, basically, and to be kept in mind, because all these are a step-by-step an understanding of how the samyama takes place, how the vikasa takes place, how the transformation, all of that will be kept in mind. But we must know the process of transformation, process of manifestation. We also saw, another point was yesterday, that attaining samyama, and we explained samyama yesterday with some dictionary definitions, which is discipline, restraint, and then I gave you a nuanced interpretation of what Swami Maheshananji has been saying, which is that it could be like a person is together, so on. Today, something reminded me of a similar discussion that we had with Swami Dayanandji, and I would like to present that to you in order to put more color into the explanation of the word samyama. Excuse me. Swami Dayananda used to say that look how a vehicle, any vehicle, bicycle even, but more complex like a motor car, or even more sophisticated, which is an airplane, is put together. Remarkable. So what happens is that an engineer that visualizes, like for example in the design of an airplane, all the parts that are necessary, the wings, the fuselage, and so on, and then provides a mechanism for them to be put together in such a way that the airplane hangs together, is not a sum of the parts. It's not as though various parts are flying in parallel to each other, but they are now amalgamated into a single entity that is very powerful, very effective. It can fly. And so I think that that kind of a visualization of samyama is very good, at least in my mind. That is the right interpretation of what samyama is. I would even offer that if you look at the constituents of the body and how the body is put together by Ishvara, very carefully put together. Swami Dayanandji used to say that, supposing your eyes are over here, your ears are someplace else, now you have to see like this, go back. No. It is a very nicely put together, designed by Ishvara. But there are various parts that all work together as a single individual. We need to extend that to the way we conduct ourselves through our minds. I think that is a good definition, a good visualization of the word samyama. So I thought I would present that before we go forward. Now we come to the third chapter, which is the subject of today's class. And the title of the chapter, and the topic of the third chapter is the first step in the vikasa of a human being. Vikasa meaning the very process of blooming, becoming developed. The first stop of this process is the jiva, the individual. It kind of like, it is kind of like a base camp in climbing Mount Everest. So this is where all the things are brought in, the Sherpas and the climbers, the food, the vendors, they all come together and they stay at a place where all of this could be fortified, become stronger before you go forward. So the first stage of the transformation of consciousness into a manifestation, so to speak, is the human being. Any being, but here we're talking about human beings. Now here, to introduce this topic, Swami Maheshananji has examined the concept of flow in the individual. Not a static view, but a dynamic view of the individual. Now, before we go into that, we need to briefly examine, I still have some lingering cough, etc. from my old pneumonia, and it's taking a long time to go, so pardon me. So, Swami Maheshananji says that it will be very useful for us to look at the individual not as a static but as a dynamic individual. Now, in order to introduce this, one important side concept, set of concepts is the following. That's not discussed in detail in this text. There are other texts where it is discussed in more detail, the very idea of a creation, particularly very well discussed in the shlokas of Purusha Suktam. And it's very possible that we might take Purusha Suktam. Some students have actually requested me to do that, and I'm considering it. If you have some interest in that, please tell me so that I can sort of decide which text to take next on the Tuesday nights. But in Purusha Suktam, this concept which I'm going to now articulate is presented in great detail. And the concept is as follows. It says that the way creation is done is that separate parts, the so-called separate parts, something like an individual which is separate from others, seemingly separate from others, tables, chairs, etc., all come from a source and go back to the source eventually. So the sense of isolation is really in transition. It is just a point in time. And this is the one which is discussed in the idea of creation. So even in Purusha Suktam or in Taittiriya Upanishad and many of the other Upanishads, creation of the universe is talked about, how it takes place. So there our Acharya says, Swami Dayananda used to say that the interest of the teaching is not have you simply recite how the creation takes place, but to point out this fact. What fact? Everything in the world comes from its source and goes back to the source. So for example, water comes from the ocean and goes back to the ocean. pieces of earth, even wood, metal, and so on, all arise from the earth and go back to the earth. So this is the general principle that we should keep in mind. Keeping this principle in mind, Swami Maheshananji now goes back to articulating that if we examine a jiva, an individual, we should be much more, it's much more insightful to examine the jiva as a flow rather than a single point. For those of you that are familiar with accounting, I'm just bringing that up because I studied accounting as part of my master's in business administration. And if I think this is nothing very rocket science, everybody knows this. There are two ways of looking at the health of an entity. One is you look at the assets, which is a single point. The other one is to look at an income statement. And when you do as an income statement, it's a dynamic viewpoint of an entity. How much money did they make during this last year? Not what the assets are today. So that is the concept. Here Swami Maheshananji says, we need to look at the flow of the parts that have become separated from the source. So let's take the water. So Swami Maheshananji says that there are always two basic directions of the flow. One direction is getting separated from the source, and this happens when, example, is all done very beautifully by Ishvara, that you have the sun heat that evaporates the water into clouds, and then you have to have some wind to take the clouds in a horizontal direction. So first there is a vertical flow, and then there is a horizontal flow. And the horizontal flow is to take the clouds close to earth and preferably near mountains. And when that happens, the condensation takes place and the rain falls down. So all along this period, from the time that the heat of the sun evaporates the water all the way up to the raining taking place, monsoon and so on, there is a flow away from the source. Then the flow reverses itself after the rain falls on the peaks of the mountains and then becomes rivulets, rivers, and the rivers do not cease to flow until they go back to the source again. So here we see that there are two directions of the flow. One is away from the source and the other one is towards the source. Okay? Having said that, now take ourselves as individuals. The idea is exactly the same. We are originated from Ishvara, and we are destined to go back to Ishvara whether we like it or not. That is the natural flow. And any desire to be permanently happy, to be unconditionally, not even permanently happy, permanent has some time in it, but unconditionally, timelessly happy is the desire for the flow of the individual to go back to the Ishvara. So that being the case, Swamiji says, we have to look at individuals dynamically. Which direction is this person going? Interesting how he presents this. He says, suppose you find an individual who has some troubles. Ishvara, very naturally, certain so on. If his anger and other things are diminishing, then that means that the flow of the individual is towards Ishvara. Okay, so this is point number one example. Swamiji says that suppose you meet someone who is very peaceful and doesn't bother anyone, he just sticks to himself and so on, and it appears like this person is very close to Ishvara, because those are the qualities of Ishvara. But he says, I have seen in my life, it just means that the wrong conditions have not yet arrived at him. It's very possible that 6 months or a year or 2 years later, you find him to be worse than what he was before. He gets involved with a lot of useless things, does stock market, loses money, gets upset, ruins his home, whatever, some kind of a worse situation. So therefore, Swamiji says, now it is very clear that this person is confused, doesn't know which direction to go, and in fact is moving away from the source. So this is the point that he was making. He also says that there are various examples in the Shastras. The very famous one, of course, is the fact the sage Vishwamitra, who used to be a robber, and he would lie on the side of the road when some vehicle with people would come in. He would cut their throats and take their money away. And so one day there was a sadhu that was passing by. So he was trying to attack the sadhu, and sadhu says, wait a second, why are you doing this? He says, I'm doing it for my family, because I don't know what else to do. This is my best way to earn money. There are a lot of children that I have. My wife also needs me, and so on. And so he says, you're not doing it for yourself? He says, no. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for them. So he says, I tell you what, let's go and talk to them. So they both walked up to their home, and the sadhu asked the wife, he's doing all these things, and he says he's doing for you and the family. Do you agree with that? And she says, what are you talking about? We've been telling him to get rid of these terrible habits that are leaving here. He's surely going to hell, and he's getting involved with us also. This person was in such a shock. They say that he started to study and became a great rishi, Vishwamitra. So Swami Maheshananji says that there are stories in the Shastra where even a terrible person, when given the right situation, can suddenly and very speedily move towards Ishvara. So this is one topic where he says, and this will be relevant as we talk further. I'm going to give you several different topics that look separate from each other, but they all hang together as we build the story about Vyaktitva ka Vikas. So this is the topic, and the topic is that we need to look at ourselves in not only in a static way, but in a dynamic way. To see, doesn't matter if I have some habits that I am not very proud of, but are those habits getting better? That is the main thing. What is the direction? So this is the one topic. Now we start a new topic. And in fact, this is really much closer to the main topic of what the book is. This topic is to contrast my externalization of my existence and the internalization of my existence. So it's kind of like external versus internal. Okay? So, several different aspects to talk about here. One is that the general public belief is that the more engagement that a person has with the world, the more the individual progresses. This is the general view. This is the wrong view. Even if there is a person who is engaged with the outside world, in let's say as a student learning some sciences, or as a tradesman accumulating money, whatever the profession happens to be, but looked at it from a standpoint of external versus internal, here are the issues. You take a student who is studying for some, going to high school, studying different subjects and so on. Swamiji says you'll find that this person, especially as you specialize in a given situation, is surrounded by books. Surrounded by books. You have textbooks on reference books, textbooks, and so on. And sometimes you find that the person comes home from the library full of books which are external to him. But the trend is for this individual to absorb the knowledge inside as much as possible, as fast as possible. And the result of that is that if you look at the dynamic view of this same individual, you'll find that the number of books that he's carrying diminishes. It's all going inside. And there comes a point, as it happens, for example, when you go to a specialist doctor, which we have all have gone to, and I have also. Like, for example, I go back to this example of the pneumonia. And there I was, and within 5 minutes, she says, let's take an X-ray. I think you have pneumonia. So I complimented her later on after the pneumonia diagnosis was positive. She says, come and see me after you take the X-ray. I went back to her and I said, Dr. Olson, how could you tell? She says, I have seen so many cases. She says, I saw you, your cough was not getting better, and you had a low-grade fever. She says, aha. So she was a specialist, wasn't studying books or anything like that, but was all absorbed from the years of study. The point is, external is not as powerful. It's not as though she has to say, let me see, let me do a Google search. No. She already has enough experience through years of study that the moment she sees a patient, she says this, that. So what this means is, here's the lesson that Swamiji is asking us to do. This is going to be developed a lot more in the next few classes. External engagements are not as useful as internal power. He gives a very interesting example on money. He says, suppose you compare a very rich person. In the US, let's say Bill Gates, and in India you have Ambani. Okay, this is one case. And the contrasting case is some poor person who's not dressed properly. You can obviously tell he doesn't have much money and so on. They both go to a hotel, very different hotels. In the case of Bill Gates and Ambani, the person can just walk out without paying his bills. How? Because, or he can just tell someone, I'm in a rush, please ask my assistant for it. And the hotel people will bow, and to him this is absolutely, welcome again, please come back again. He hasn't paid his bills for the last 1 week. He can go away. Okay, because his wealth is now internal. It's now he's gotten name and fame. If this poor fellow comes in and says, I will pay you the bill tomorrow. Okay, I forgot my credit card, and people will say you cannot leave the premises because his wealth has not yet been internalized. One can say the wealth is still outside, but here the point is that as you become more progressed in your life, the strength is more closer to you than dependence on things outside. That is the main point that Swamiji wants us to know. So now Swamiji makes a conclusion. And the conclusion is internal vikasa, internal blooming, is much more powerful towards the ultimate vikasa for lots of reasons. Lots of reasons. One of them is, obviously, one is that outside vikasa, outside accomplishments are dependent on other things. We'll come to that in a minute, but let me give you another very interesting reason. He says that as we move towards Ishvara, if that flow is towards Ishvara, you will see that the internal strength of the person is getting better. The outside accomplishments may not be there. This is a very important point that I'm going to build on. That what we need to do, this is all in answer to the questions we all have. This is the most often question any student of the Vedanta asks, which is, you talk about Atma and Anatma and so on and so forth, and all this I can understand. I understand. I remember when I was with Swamiji, and you will be sitting in satsang, this is the most normal thing in the satsang, especially by new people that will come and say, Swamiji, what you say just makes a lot of sense. But I know I am Atma. I know I am Brahman. I know all that. Because you've been talking about it, and it's not a very difficult thing. I think I'm smart enough to know that. But Swamiji smiles, and not in front of the people, but sometimes he can tell the more experienced people that live with him. I was very lucky to stay with him for 2 years, 2.5 years at PRC, practically next to him. I spent so much time, and many times the satsang is over, and my wife are still sitting there next to him, and he would comment about the satsang and the people. The Swamiji will say, the person says, I know Brahman and I know Atma. And Swamiji says, no, you don't. He wouldn't tell that to people. This is not knowledge. This is not knowledge. This is just some concepts that you have listened to. But really speaking, the knowledge comes when you have to completely understand how the knowledge of Atma would transform in my life to me. How will that happen? And so that has to be understood completely. And if you don't understand it, then you haven't really received it. So anyway, going back to what Swami Maheshananji was saying, that if we move towards Ishvara, our internal strength increases. And conversely, not conversely, but on looking at it the other way around, if your internal strengths are getting better, you're moving towards Ishvara. Okay, this is one point. Another thing he says that external accomplishments breed competition, even conflict and jealousy. So, for instance, the competition of external accomplishments between nations, between the US and China, for example, there is now a great competition for who has the most power, who has the most money, who has the most prestige in life, in the world, and so on. There's a competition, and there is a military power, external accomplishment. So it is full of jealousy and so on. Internal accomplishments are not like that. They are by nature very peaceful. A beautiful example of that is yoga. And you can even include alternative medicines like Ayurveda or Unani system and so on. That is an internal improvement of a person, not any something that you are displaying to others. There's possible that yoga teachers are boasting and so on, but I don't see that. I think that the yoga practitioners usually don't boast about things. But the interesting thing is that if a person is very good in yoga, which is an internal accomplishment, I approach that person peacefully and say, can you please teach me what really is making you so good? So the internal accomplishments are not conflicting, non-competitive, there's no jealousy. Outside accomplishments are. He makes a beautiful point on that. Then the point is, the main point is, that a person with external accomplishments means you also need external help. You're much more dependent. And he gives a very humorous example, very interesting. He says, there are people who would say, I had quadruple bypass surgery. As though this is something to be boasted on. And guess what? I was treated at the best hospital in Bombay, and the world's best surgeon attended on me, and I was there for 3 weeks. I lived there like a king. And there is very possible that another person in the party would say, why, nothing like happened to me. Now, out of these two, which one is better? Is that a person that had a problem and is boasting about it? It is kind of like, a person who's saying, I have the most sophisticated walker that I just got from Amazon. It costs a lot of money and it is motorized and so on. And look how well I can walk with the help of that. And the other poor person doesn't even need a walker. Which one is better? A person that doesn't need any external help, or a person that does and boasts about it? Very, very clear about that. So now we go to the next step, which is the strengthening of the internal structure of the human being is the first step in the vikasa, in the blooming of the individual. So as we were saying, that strengthening the base camp at the base of Himalayas is very important. If you leave the base camp without sufficient food, without sufficient clothing for the very cold weather outside, you're going to be in problems. It is better to say an extra week, make sure you've got everything, and then start the climb. So Swamiji says the problem is we have left our internal structure so weak that we cannot stand the onslaught of our mind and sense organs upon us. We become, in fact, slaves to them because we have not fortified the internal structure of the human being. So, for instance, your mind says, I am very sad, and I think this sadness is here to stay. What do you think? And I look at my mind and I don't like it. I don't want to be sad, and particularly I don't want to stay that way. It's okay to be momentarily sad, that happens to all of us, but really speaking, I don't want to stay that way. It kind of reminds me what Swami Dayanandaji had once said on this topic. He said, as you progress in Vedanta, what you will find is that, yes, you may be upset like everybody else. That just happens because there's something unexpected happens and so on. But there is no build-up of that upset. There is no continuity of that. And he used to give this example, a very beautiful example, Swami Dayanandaji did. He said, you look at a child, and a child and an adult, if they have some kind of an issue, the mother or father can say, I told you to do this, how come you didn't do this? And the child says, you always are bossing me, whatever. What happens is you observe the behavior of the child and the adult an hour later. The child has forgotten it. And he approaches the mother and father as though the whole thing is gone. Doesn't really think about it. A mother and father do not forget it. My child is beginning to really be indisciplined. I don't like that. And so you have a build-up. So Swamiji used to say, be like a child. Yes, it is okay to be upset once in a while, but let it go. Don't hang on to it. Anyway, to the topic at hand here, Swami Maheshananji says that one who has not fortified and has not become a samyami is really a slave to a number of things, slave to the mind. Because the mind says, I'm sad and I want to stay like this and I don't like it, but I say, okay, I guess there's nothing else I can do. If you're sad, I'm sad also. You and I are the same. You cannot make it viveka any distinction. Body is the same way. He says that sometimes you say, I think I want to lift this suitcase because I just have a little bit where to go. And your hand says, no, I'm too weak. I cannot lift this suitcase. And you give in. You don't even try. So you hire a porter to take the suitcase. This is just being a slave to your body. Sense organs is the same way. There is some nice music coming, you are supposed to study, and then there is some noise and music and this, that, or the other, and your sense organ says, this is very nice. And you're supposed to say, no, this is the time to study, but you don't. You say, okay. So anyway, what happens is, you do not realize the power that you have. Shastra says this so well. Shastra says, listen, Jiva, you don't understand how much power you have. It's amazing. In fact, so much so that there are no limits to it. And you are acting in a very weak fashion. And don't do that. So here we'll end with this a very important and a very often quoted story to illustrate this point. And Swami Maheshananji, I think a lot of the other acharyas have also said it, but I really found his structured way of explaining the story and how it applies to us very useful. So here's the story. The story is, in the forest there was a bunch of lions and lionesses that would roam around the forest. So one day, a lioness was alone, hunting for food for her children. And she was very pregnant. She was very heavy with this lion cub. And so she was moving very slowly and so on. And suddenly she found that there's a stock of sheep grazing in the forest. So she leapt towards the sheep. And the sheep was also moving. In the process, two things happened. One is that she gave birth to the cub by the shock of her jump. And the second thing that happened was that where she jumped, there was a very sharp stub of a tree. She fell on it and died. So this is a contrived story, but this is the story. You can visualize it. So what happens is the lioness is dead, the sheep are all there, and now there is this little cub of the lion who just needs some help. So as the mother of the sheep is very lovingly, she offered some milk to this lion cub. The lion cub is very small, hasn't really become a lion yet. And then they teach him how to graze the grass, and slowly he becomes one with them. If they go in one direction, he also goes, even though he's bigger than the other ones. But his behavior is exactly like that of the sheep. If there is some kind of attack by a bigger animal, if all people run, he also runs. He's also afraid, and so on. So this is the background. So one day, there was a lion who came in, and he saw that this fellow is behaving like a sheep. And he went to him and he says, "What the heck are you doing?" So he says, "What do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying." He says, you are not like a sheep, you are a lion." So in doing so, he presents 5 different reasons. And the way he talks, the way he explains to him, is very useful. So we should look into that. So first of all, that's how the story goes. The lion talks to this small lion. Talks to him. He says, "Listen, you're being foolish. You don't understand this. So there are 5 steps to it. This is step number 1. Step number 2 is he grabs him by the neck, takes him to a pond, and asks him while he's talking to look at his reflection in the pond. His form, his size, his paws, and that describes it. You are so different. Don't you see how different you are from them? This is step number 2. The third step is that he gives him some meat to taste. The sheep are vegetarians. They have never eaten meat, but he gives him some meat to taste, and he likes it. Like, wow, I've never had this before. And so this is step number 3. The fourth step is that he asks him to practice, because now what's happening is that the cub's doubts are going, but they're still there because he's really grown up as a sheep for a long time. And so he still has some ideas that, I don't know, maybe I guess I'm a lion, but I guess I'm a lion. This is a doubtful kind of a thing. He doesn't say I'm a lion. He says, I guess I'm a lion. So in order to remove his doubts further, he gives him a rabbit to pounce on and kill him. right there and then. He makes him go and pounce on a rabbit. And this young lion cub says, wow, that was easy. All I had to do is I can just take a couple of steps. He didn't run away from me, and I can just grab him. So this is step number 4. Then the last step was, he tells him, okay, you come with me, of course, and now I'm going to give you better and bigger prey to because you are the king of the whole forest. Other than an elephant that I leave alone, I can attack anything. And so I want you to practice bigger and bigger prey until you're absolutely positive about who you are. And he does that, and he becomes a lion, which he always was. This is the story. So now the application of the story to us is as follows. We are now living as a jiva. We are behaving like a jiva. Jiva meaning a limited, weak person, subject to problems, subject to diseases, coronavirus, afraid of it. We have got issues with our other health. What about my money? Am I going to be paid the mortgage? This is the jivatva. We are now following the family of mind, body, instruments, which are sheep. We think we are the family. Whatever the family characteristics of the mind, body, and instruments are, they are my qualities. So this is exactly what happens to a lion. Even though he's a lion, but he behaves like a lion because he lives amongst them. And he looks around and says, this is how things are. The jiva does the same thing. He thinks that he belongs to the family of limited anatma things. This is what it is. In comes a lion in the form of a Brahmavit, a jnani. And he says, wait a second. Do you know who you really are? There are two types of things in this world. One is the limited changing. The other one is the unlimited unchanging, which is the family of Parameshwara, of Ishvara, of God. You belong to that family, not to this family. Did you know that? And of course, initially I say, what are you talking about? Oh, Parameshwara, I have nothing to do with that. Don't insult Parameshwara. No, don't do that. You are a wonderful person and I really seek your advice. If you can make my life a little bit happier, I'll be very happy. That's all I need. I don't need anything more. So this Brahma Jnani says, no, you don't understand. Let me tell you. Let me now explain to you in 5 steps who you really are. And those same 5 steps are there that the lion used. Step number 1 was a lot of talking, a lot of classes. This is called Shravanam. A lot of explanations. You cannot be like this, you have to be that, so don't you see that? This is number 1. The second one is logic. About 6 more minutes. I think I can finish this. The second one is logic. And what is the logic? This is a very important thing to see. The logic is that you are the source of the strength and you are giving the strength to your mind, body and instruments who are just borrowing it from you. They have no strength on their own. As we saw yesterday, that really speaking, the innate light is the one that is drawing the light, and then everything else is really following it. Tameva bhantam anubhati etat sarvam. Dakshinamurti Stotram, number 4, as we studied yesterday. You are the main light. And this is the logic. Don't you see that really everything is just borrowing your light? And we will study this more. You are the very source of isness. And the others borrow your isness. So when you say that the table is, the isness belongs to you, the form belongs to the table. The table is not independently isness. This is the logic, which is step number 2. This is exactly like taking the cub and taking him to a pond. Here, the ideas of reflection, Atma and Anatma, the Bimba, as we've been studying, Bimba meaning the original, and the Pratibimba, which is the reflection. The Pratibimba is not as real. It is there, but it's not real. You're the one who's real. This is step number 2. Step number 3, equivalent to, gives him some meat to taste. Here, the Guru tells him, look at the following things. Right now, your idea is that I am only happy when I acquire some things, including food. I am only happy if I take Haagen-Dazs ice cream. I am only happy if I have some dessert after my dinner. I'm only happy if the stock market goes up. This is your idea of happiness, isn't it? And he says, yes. So the taste is, what if I can show you that even better happiness than the Vishaya Ananda, which is called Vishaya Ananda, meaning you are happy because of something. What if we can show you that you can be happier than that without the Vishaya? This is the taste. And there are 2 examples of this taste. There are many. Swami Dayanand used to, he was of course a very funny person. None of us can be as funny. He would just tell, he would have some very funny jokes in his pocket, and at this time, he would pull that out and make everybody laugh. And then he would say, see, you're happy without any reason. So this is the pointing out of having Ananda without any reason. So the 2 of them are deep sleep. You haven't eaten any ice cream in deep sleep. In a dream you do, but not in deep sleep. You are the happiest. And samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, yogic samadhi. There is no acquisition of anything. You are just happy by yourself. So the Guru lets him taste it. And what it says is that you are innately Ananda. Your Swarupa is Ananda. Don't you understand that? Is number 3. The number 4 is very interesting. The 4 was, you remember, that he asked him to pounce on a rabbit and see how easy it was to kill the rabbit without any effort on your part. No fear. You're much stronger than that. Here, the equivalent to a jiva is, get yourself involved in a difficult situation and find out, despite the difficult situation, how peaceful you have become. It doesn't bother you anymore. This is the practice of your new strength within this world, which you never did before. I have to tell you, I got an email from a student recently who said, I find that in my family, I am very peaceful despite coronavirus. Everyone else is upset and really worried, and they do not understand why I am so calm. She wrote to me recently. This is a good example of that. So and I think this should be true for many of us, most of us, I think, that really our strength of understanding of the Shastra, even though it is not yet complete, is enough to allow us to really face difficult situations without going under. And so the fourth asked him was, pouncing on a rabbit without effort is translated into going into situations and understanding compared to what it used to be before. I got a lot of very beautiful emails from you. Honestly, I am very happy about that. And you all tell me that I haven't reached where I want to be, but I'm a lot better than before. That pleases me a lot. That really everybody says, a lot of the people, I get emails from you saying, I see the improvement on I stay calm without any problems. So this is the practice of pouncing on a rabbit. The fifth one, the last one is, now practice it more and more with more difficult situations and remove any doubts that really the inner strength is taking you closer to Ishvara. You're on the right direction. You may not have reached it yet. You may be upset that I haven't reached it yet. Be very, very, very patient with yourself. You will get there. So with that, I apologize, I take a couple of extra minutes. And so the summary is of this class: gain an inner strength. Do not be afraid of the mind, the body, and so on. Don't be the tail that wags the dog. You are the dog, they are the tails. Understand what family you belong to. And gain confidence by self-trust and by constant practice. And if you do that, you are becoming a samyami. You're becoming together as a person. And that shows you're really on the right path. So in the next class, this whole process of gaining strength and becoming more purposeful and more effective in relying less on the outside will be explained more by a chapter called Vratam. And so that will be the fourth class. And I guess this class will be next week on Tuesday at 8 o'clock. And until then, I say goodbye to you with a small prayer. And I will look at any questions that you may have. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo. Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudam. Don't be the tail that wags the dog. You are the dog, they are the tails. Understand what family you belong to. And gain confidence by self-trust and by... Okay. So there's no question by anybody. You have all greeted me with Namaste. I thank you, and we will see you next week. Namaste.